Besides the global flood, there's perhaps no other legend as pervasive or as perennial as the legend of a paradisical Neverland. A land that's filled with wise and good superior beings, where beauty and peace are the order of the day, and from which a messianic king is expected to come to Earth one day to usher in a golden age. I'm talking about Shambhala, the sacred kingdom all of humanity seems to have a vague memory about, but somehow can't find their way back to. Since the early 20th century, world governments have funded multiple expeditions, each one more determined than the last, to search for this sacred kingdom, convinced it holds the key to unlocking a new era. Unfortunately, one after the other, each of these expeditions has failed, forcing us to give up and accept the fact that maybe Shambhala doesn't exist. But of course, you know by now to take whatever your government tells you with several cups of salt, not even just a pinch. So what's the true story of Shambhala? In simple terms, it exists, it's been found, and it just might be disturbingly different from everything we've been told. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the legend of Shambhala. You can easily look that up yourself online. I want to instead focus on the more esoteric aspects of the Shambhala story. So to begin, I'll just do a quick run-through of the universal version of the legend, so we can get to the juicy stuff, because, trust me, there's a whole lot to unpack. Alright, so Shambhala is spoken of in many different ancient texts, but the primary text from which we get our most comprehensive account of this mystical kingdom is the Kalachakra, an esoteric and advanced system of teaching and practice in Tibetan Buddhism. According to the texts, Shambhala is surrounded by an imposing ring of snowy mountains. This mountain ring keeps intruders out, as the only way to get over it is by flying, not via an aircraft, but through spiritual means. Shambhala's capital city is called Kalapa, and its rulers descend from the Kalki dynasty. It is also said that Shambhala houses the purest teachings of the Kalachakra Tantra, and that its residents have gained enlightenment and are, thus, superior to mere mortals like you and me. Perhaps the most crucial thing to know about Shambhala is the Kalachakra Tantra prophecy attached to it. The text says that one day, the world will begin to descend into chaos and war as people start to pursue materialism over spirituality. Rudra Chakran will rise from his throne and lead an army against the evil forces, ultimately destroying them. This victory will then usher in a golden age for humanity, a time when the rule of Shambhala will be established all over the world. In this golden age, food will grow without work, and disease, poverty, and hatred will pass away as dead saints and sages will return to Earth to teach the true wisdom of the ages. If you're wondering when this golden age is going to come, well, some scholars have put the date at 2424 AD, which unfortunately means that you and I won't live to see it. But I won't give that too much thought though. It's not the first time prophecies of an apocalypse have been dated and ended up being false. I mean, Mayan calendar, anyone? And yeah, I know that true Mayan teachings did not necessarily predict an apocalypse in 2012, but keep this somewhere in the back of your mind as we continue. I'll throw back to it later. Meanwhile, that's about everything you need to know about the legend of Shambhala. Let's now get into the more interesting and bizarre stuff. Shambhala is definitely enthralling all by itself, so it's not surprising that many have tried to study and look into its secrets. What's surprising, however, are the weird consequences that have followed. For example, it's been said that most Western scientists who tried studying Shambhala died tragically under mysterious circumstances. Take Albert Grünewedel, the German Orientalist, for instance. Grünewedel was a well-respected figure in the fields of art history and archaeology. In fact, his research work played a huge role in introducing Buddhist culture to Europe. Yet when he started working on a translation of Shambhala texts, he somehow drove himself crazy. And then, one day, in the middle of that temporal lunacy, Gruenvedel threw himself out of his window and died. I mean, how do you explain that? Or, how do you explain how people embark on expeditions to find Shambhala, but then never return? Some say that they probably found Shambhala and chose not to return, but the more popular belief is that these people were destroyed on their unfortunate adventure. One example would be the mysterious disappearance of the English explorer Colonel Percy H. Fawcett and his two companions in 1925. Fawcett had set out to look for a certain subterranean city somewhere in the mountains of Mato Grosso in Brazil, one of the alleged entrances to Shambhala. The geographer believed that this city had all the answers to some of humanity's most profound questions, and he wanted to locate and open up these cities to scientific research. Unfortunately, neither he nor his companions ever made it back from their expedition. Perhaps this was because of the purpose of Fawcett's mission. Because, you see, according to the Lamas, anyone who wants to investigate the legend of Shambhala must profess the Buddhist teachings of Kalachakra Tantra themselves. And any attempt to look into the sacred teachings of Shambhala without fulfilling that requirement could lead a person to suffer the same fate as Albert Gruenvedel. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a mere myth kill a person for failure to believe in it. I mean, that's the point of a myth. It's not real, so it shouldn't be able to hurt you. That's why no one older than 6 fears the boogeyman. He's not real. Why then are people losing their minds, disappearing, and dying just from investigating the sacred texts about Shambhala? You can let me know what your thoughts are, but my mind went in 2 directions. My first thought is that Shambhala has to be a real place, perhaps even real in the sense of a physical place where a person can actually go. Secondly, and more ominously though, I started to get the feeling that maybe Shambhala is not quite what we've been made to believe it is. You know, this place of tranquility and happiness. I mean, what if it's the total opposite of that? What if Shambhala is actually an evil kingdom waiting to destroy humanity? I admit that, even to me, that sounded a bit absurd, at least at first. But the deeper I dug into my research, the more I found hidden tale after hidden tales of a malevolent Shambhala that did not quite fit the traditional Shambhala narrative. Of course, I'll uncover that. But before we get to that, there's something else you need to know first, which is the Western connection to Shambhala. Understanding this is key to making sense of the whole Shambhala mystery, so make sure to pay close attention. The Eastern concept of Shambhala first entered into Western thought through the work of this grim-looking woman. You probably know her as the founder of the Theosophy movement, which effectively introduced Eastern religion to the West. It all began in 1888, when Blavatsky published what is perhaps her most popular work, The Secret Doctrine. The eccentric medium had claimed that she had received the teaching contained in the book telepathically from certain ascended masters in Tibet. And with that, The Secret Doctrine officially became the West's first introduction to Shambhala. Now, according to Blavatsky, Shambhala is located in the Gobi Desert, between Mongolia and China, where a secret order known as the Great White Brotherhood resides. Blavatsky also mentions that the city is ruled by a king called the Lord of the World, though there are also other, lesser beings known as masters. Speaking of, it was 2 of these masters from Shambhala who telepathically communicated the content of her book, The Secret Doctrine. After Blavatsky introduced the Western occult society to Shambhala, the community immediately went agog with excitement. Particularly, two of her students, a couple known as Nicholas and Helena Roerich, were so stirred that they decided they were going to look for Shambhala. Their expedition would successfully bring back one of the first concrete pieces of evidence that there was something to the Shambhala tales. I'm talking about the bizarre journal Nicholas kept. If there was anyone who had made it, it was Nicholas Roerich. Roerich started out as a world-famous painter and stage designer. He even got nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize and was chummy with the FDR administration. But around the 1920s, he had an experience that completely changed the trajectory of his life. Some Buddhist masters visited him and informed him that he had been called to kick off a new religious movement known as Future Buddha. According to the message, this new movement would unite millions of Asian people in a movement known as the Sacred Union of the East. This will then officially set the stage for the appearance of the 25th king of Shambhala and the dawn of the Golden Age. Fast forward to 1925, and Nicholas began a 5-year tour of Asia from India through Mongolia and then to Tibet, before making a detour to Moscow. Officially, Roerich's expedition was said to be for scientific and artistic purposes. In truth, however, Roerich's tour was an attempt to find Shambhala, a key step in the execution of his grand plan. According to what we've been told, Roerich's first journey was a huge failure, but I struggle to believe that, because in 1934, Roerich, the allegedly failed expeditioner, kicked off a new mission, this time to Manchuria, to study grasses. I hope you can hear my air quotes. And this time, he even went on American taxpayers' money. One would expect that most people would avoid the Roeriches after their alleged failure with the first expedition. But that was not the case at all. The United States not only backed the Roeriches financially with taxpayer money, but President Roosevelt's Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace, became Nicholas Roerich's biggest cheerleader. The best part? Despite the embarrassment that followed when the Roeriches failed again, the United States still chose to immortalize Roerich's name by instituting the Roerich Pact. By the way, in case you were wondering, the pact basically says that we have to protect cultural objects and not destroy them or use them for military purposes. Simply put, the protection of culture takes priority over any military necessity. I hope I'm not the only one seeing how this whole thing just sounds fishy. 2 times now, Roerich has officially failed in his expedition. Yet somehow, he gets rewarded with more funding, along with a national honor. Something definitely doesn't add up. Did Roerich really fail? Well, why don't we hear from Nicholas Roerich himself? Like every expeditioner, Roerich kept a travel log of his travels and his findings. Actually, Roerich kept 2. One was for his scientific discoveries, which was mostly empty on account of his true purpose for the expedition being anything but scientific. The other journal was supposed to keep track of the mystical encounters Roerich experienced in his travels. Now, this one was full, which leads us to the multiple theories about Shambhala. To be clear, there are tons of theories about Shambhala, and I definitely cannot touch on all of them in one video. That's why I only picked what I felt were the 3 most popular, most worthy contenders. The first is the UFO base theory. The second is the Agartha theory. And the third is what I'm going to call the illusory theory. Don't worry, it's going to make sense soon. In the meantime, let's begin with the UFO theory. And to do that, we're going to pick up right where we left off with Nicholas Roerich and his diary. I should probably start off by saying that Roerich himself did not believe that he had come across a UFO base during his expedition. However, as you'll soon see, There aren't many other ways to interpret the strange experiences Roerich wrote down in his secret journal. As a backdrop, during his first trip, Roerich spent a lot of time talking with lamas and Buddhist priests. Now, on one of those days, there was a shrine consecration ceremony, and after the event, one of the lamas predicted that something auspicious was going to happen. A day or two later, something auspicious did, in fact, happen. But I want to let Roerich tell you the story himself. These are his words. A sunny, unclouded morning. The blue sky is brilliant. Over our camp flied a huge, dark vulture. Our Mongols and we watch it. Suddenly, one of the Buryat lamas points into the blue sky. What is that? A white balloon? An aeroplane? We notice something shiny, flying high from the northeast to the south. We bring 3 powerful field glasses from the tents and watch the huge spheroid body shining against the sun, clearly visible against the blue sky and moving very fast. Afterwards, we see that it sharply changes its direction from south to southwest and disappears behind the snow-peaked Humboldt chain. Now, here's why this entry makes such a strong case for a UFO base. Roerich's expedition happened in the 20s. That's a couple of decades before the UFO craze began. In other words, Roerich definitely didn't have any UFO narrative burning somewhere in the back of his mind when recounting this story. Besides, Roerich hadn't even taken his trip to look for a UFO base. He had gone to look for a mystical place. So we know his experiences aren't being colored by hidden biases. Roerich was simply saying it as he saw it. And now that that's clear, let's go over the evidence again. The object Roerich saw and reported in his diary had the following characteristics. It was huge, it was golden, it was spherical in shape, perhaps even saucer-shaped. It moved at atypically fast speed. Put all of these characteristics together, and you find that the golden object Roerich talked about in his diary perfectly fits the description of the flying saucer that would become a craze in America in just a couple of decades. Okay, you're probably saying to me, that's circumstantial at best. This doesn't prove anything. Well, let's see how the lamas themselves interpreted the omen. According to Roerich's diary, after they all witnessed the sight, he was told by the lamas that what he had seen was the sign of Shambhala, which meant that the Great Ones of Altai, the Lords of Shambhala, had blessed his mission. So let's pause and think about that for a second. If the Lords of Shambhala are sending out UFOs as omens to someone who is on a journey to Shambhala, I mean, is it then far-fetched to say that Shambhala is probably a UFO base? I think not, especially because Eastern religions from which we get Shambhala are replete with tales of deities building and possessing UFO-like vehicles. In fact, it's the one thing that separates the Hindu religion from many others out there. Rather than leave things at levitating or winged gods, sacred texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana talk about gods making use of flying machines. And curiously, these flying machines written about over 1,000 years ago and called Vimana tend to have the same characteristics as the regular UFOs spoken of in modern-day ET lore. For instance, ancient Indian texts describe the flying machines of the gods as being double-deck circular aircrafts with portholes and a dome. And that's almost word for word what flying saucers in typical UFO lores typically look like. These texts also mention that the Vimanas fly at the speed of the wind and make a melodious sound in the process. And that's not all. They say that the Vimanas come in different shapes. Some are saucer-shaped, while others are long cylinders, or what we call cigar-shaped airships. The texts even speak of what we might consider to be motherships. For instance, in the Mahabharata, one of the gods, Salva, is said to have a vehicle that is described as an iron city. In other words, this vehicle must have been metallic and large, which tracks with what we now know to be motherships. But there's even more concrete, real-life evidence that Hindu deities were very likely aliens, which strengthens the Shambhala UFO-based theory much more than the other theories we're going to look at. So, in 1974, scientists discovered a heavy layer of radioactive ash in Rajasthan, India. As a matter of fact, for a long time, the Indian government had been noticing a high rate of birth defects and cancer in the area, which was why they ran a nuclear test. From their findings, the scientists discovered that the radioactive ash seemed to have come from an atomic blast that dates back to about 8,000 to 12,000 years ago. That's more than 10,000 years before the atomic bomb was invented. Where could these ancient people have gotten an atomic bomb from? Well, the Mahabharata has an answer. I'm just going to read you an excerpt from an episode of the Mahabharata epic, and you tell me what you think. Gurkha, flying in his swift and powerful Vimana, hurled against the three cities of the Vrishnis and Anhakas, a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as the 1,000 suns rose in all its splendor. An iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Anhakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. The hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. I don't know about you, but this sounds to me like the scene of a nuclear war. The kind that would perfectly explain the radiological ash in Rajasthan, India, and provide real-life proof that the Hindu deities were likely extraterrestrials. And if that's the case, then Shambhala could very likely be a UFO base. And the enlightened beings there may very likely be humanoid aliens. It's not a far-fetched deduction. Besides, another thing we can't overlook is how nearly all purported entrances to Shambhala almost always give off strong UFO vibes. Consider Mount Kailash, for example. The mountain is traditionally considered one of the portals to Shambhala. And if you've already checked out my video on Mount Kailash, thumbs up, you know where I'm getting at. If you haven't, do yourself a solid and do that. It will help to make sense of all of this. But just to quickly summarize, Mount Kailash has all this weird stuff going on around it. Time bends weirdly there, the electromagnetic field is off, and people have tried to summit it, only to disappear mysteriously. And we haven't even talked about the oddly perfect sides of this pyramidal mountain that make people convinced that it was artificially built by a civilization with advanced technology that is now lost to us. And then we have the Himalayas, another popular entrance to Shambhala. Extraterrestrial activity has also been observed in this region. Around the start of the 20th century, there was a story in an Indian newspaper about a certain British mayor who camped in the Himalayas only to discover that he was being watched by a tall, strange man. After the encounter, the mayor went to speak with the locals about what he had just seen. Not surprisingly, the locals didn't even skip a beat. They told him that what had just happened to him was a common occurrence. The strange man the mayor had seen was simply one of the snowy men guarding the entrances into the Holy Earth. Could this have been an alien? Honestly, in light of everything we've seen about Shambhala so far, my money is on alien creature. So could Shambhala be a UFO base? Perhaps. But the next theory is even more convincing. In a separate video, I go very deeply into the topic of Agartha, so be sure to check it out if you haven't, because I'll only be touching on it briefly in this video to give a bit of context as we look into our second theory, which basically posits that Shambhala is the capital city of Agartha. Many even say that Shambhala and Agartha are the same, but scholars have mentioned time and again that that's not the case, so I won't be going down that rabbit hole. Let's focus on the capital city theory instead. To give the most basic form of the legend, Agartha is said to be a mysterious underground kingdom located beneath Asia and linked by a vast network of both natural and man-made tunnels. Now, a lot of these tunnels have been destroyed as a result of cataclysms, but there are few remaining. However, the location of these tunnels, as well as the location of Agartha itself, remains most carefully hidden, as Agartha is said to be a storehouse of ancient wisdom. Only high initiates know where Agartha is and how to get to it. Already, you can see the similarities between Agartha and Shambhala, so the capital city theory is definitely tracking up to this point. But there are even more similarities. It is said that Agartha is ruled by a sovereign pontiff and inhabited by ascended masters, advanced beings with deeply profound wisdom, who control the entire world from their place in Agartha. Not only that, it is also said that there are vast libraries containing the wisdom of the ages, as well as super advanced technologies in this subterranean kingdom. Almost everyone in Agartha, from priests to scientists, wield incredible power, enough to transform our planet into a desert or blow off its entire surface. I'm not just saying that, I mean that literally, which segues nicely into my next point, and something I hinted at earlier. Most of the legends around Agartha and Shambhala paint them as this peaceful paradise that's waiting to share its wisdom with the world when humans finally lose their way. But remember when I said I found hidden tales about a malevolent Shambhala? Well, there's a lesser-known Agartha/Shambhala legend, and let's just say, if this is the truth, humans should be very afraid. So, according to certain esoteric texts, Shambhala and Agartha are actually two parts of a unified spiritual and material realm, with Shambhala being the seat of spiritual wisdom, political power, and technological advancement, while Agartha serves as the material expression of Shambhala's enlightened guidance. However, it gets deeper and more sinister. Certain accounts also say that Shambhala is more than just a center for spiritual enlightenment. They say that it's actually a center of occult power and arcane teaching. In fact, they say that Shambhala is less of a capital city and more of the evil counterpart of Agartha, ruled by an evil sorcerer king called the Lord of the World. We'll talk more about this Lord of the World in a bit. But for now, let's do a quick run-through of the alternative, lesser-known history of Shambhala and Agartha. This version was first found in the writings of French researchers Louis Pauwels and Jacques Berriger, as well as Jean-Claude Ferry. Thousands of years ago, when Hyperborea Thule still existed up in the north, a group of Hyperboreans exiled themselves down south, where they started their own society. They called this city Agarthi, or Agartha. But then, a worldwide cataclysm happened that caused Agartha to sink beneath the earth, leading to another split within the new society. One society went further south to find a secret learning center beneath the Himalayas, which they also called Agartha. The other group, however, returned to Hyperborea Thule, where they set up their own city, which they called Shambhala, where they set up their own city, which they called Shambala. Unlike the new and old Agartha, this Shambhala turned out to be a city of violence, evil, and materialism, which, as you can see, is quite different from the story we were initially told. Still, this version of events tracks with Hindu Tantra teachings, which talk about the right and left-hand paths. The right-hand path, or Dashankara, is the mode of life that involves adopting a moral code and following traditional social norms. On the left-hand path, however, the lines between right and wrong blur. Shambhala, being on the left or negative path, followed the Luciferic oracle and became a truly evil city. And speaking of Lucifer, I mentioned earlier that we were going to look more closely into Shambhala's so-called Lord of the Worlds later, right? Well, brace up. As I dug deeper into more hidden sources, I found that there was this claim that Shambhala's Lord of the World used to be a Venusian. According to legend, the Lord of the World landed on Earth from Venus several thousand years ago. However, despite being thousands of years old, he still managed to retain his youthful appearance, which immediately brought several things to mind. There's only one other person who fits this description that I can think of, and that person is Lucifer. In biblical texts, Lucifer is described as the morning star, or light bringer, which is the same name for Venus. Secondly, Lucifer is associated with hell, which again is synonymous with Venus and its hellish surface. So when you put all of this together, it seems to suggest that the Lord of the World, who is King of Shambhala, is none other than Lucifer himself, which is truly terrifying. Because it means that Shambhala is real. But if this kingdom is as evil and as powerful as we've just learned, then humanity might be in a lot of trouble in the coming days. Now, let's explore the final theory, or what I call the illusory theory. So, we know Shambhala is a real place by now. Everything we've seen up to this point proves that. But what if Shambhala doesn't exist in our physical realm? This unique perspective is offered by religious texts, scriptures, and even paintings. According to certain interpretations of Tibetan Buddhist teachings, Shambhala is more accurately understood as an illusory continent. For context, an illusory continent in Buddhist cosmology is a planet that floats in space, appearing and disappearing like an illusion. Shambhala, being an illusory continent, is said to appear to us from a higher dimension, which is where it also disappears from time to time. The higher dimension is called Akanishta, and it's considered to be a pure land where one of Buddha's forms, the Sambhogakaya, resides. Zeroing in some more, it is said that Shambhala sits in the north side of Earth, which means that it's not a place on Earth. However, despite that, this theory maintains that the people of Shambhala are not aliens, but humans like us, except that they live longer due to their practice of time wheel meditation, a practice that Earthlings abandoned to their destruction. Anyway, Shambhala and Earth are connected by portals that technically allow for travel between the two planets. However, in reality, only citizens of Shambhala are able to move freely without restraints. Earthlings are not allowed to move as freely, as some protectors guard the border and only allow a select few humans with high moral standards to visit Shambhala. In other words, think monks and lamas. That said, just like the traditional Shambhala legends, this version of events also comes with a prophecy that one day Earth will descend into a dark age, where humans will forget everything about religion and ethics. In those days, the prophecy says people will start to die very young, to the point that living up to 10 years will be considered an achievement even, as famine, disease, and war become the order of the day. Mercifully, a few humans will survive, after which some bodhisattvas from Shambhala will incarnate as humans and come to Earth to guide humans back to the right path. Alright, so we've looked at different theories, each one completely different from the other. The question now is, which of these theories is the right one? Is Shambhala a UFO base? Is it a place where malevolent forces led by Satan himself are planning how to wipe out Earth? Or maybe Shambhala isn't even on our planet at all? I have my own theory, and I'll share soon. But just before we get to that, I think it's only fair to address the critical objections against the legends of Shambhala. I don't think there's any critical evidence strong enough to debunk the existence of Shambhala, so most of the critical objections I found valid were those that challenged the popular interpretations of the Shambhala legend, and that's what I'm going to share. So the first thing to understand about Shambhala and all the theories surrounding it is that most of them have Western influences, and the primary reason this is problematic is because of Madame Helena Blavatsky, the first person to introduce Shambhala to Western thought. You see, Blavatsky encountered Tibetan Buddhism at a time when much of Europe wasn't familiar with the religion. In the first place, Blavatsky herself wasn't able to access the full range of Tibetan Buddhist teachings. It's not even clear whether she actually studied the Kalachakra texts themselves before beginning her translation, so even her so-called knowledge of the religion wasn't reliable to begin with. Secondly, in trying to translate some of the teachings, Blavatsky explained the basic terms using concepts from Hinduism and the occult, which she believed her audience would be more familiar with. This didn't exactly seem underhanded to Blavatsky, since she believed all religions of the world actually stem from one unified body of occult knowledge. Unfortunately for the rest of us, this move only ended up muddying the waters and confusing the concept of Shambhala for later students. It was Blavatsky who connected Shambhala with the occult, leading to the prevalent Western conflation of this new hybrid concept that Blavatsky invented with actual Buddhist teachings. But here's where it gets ugly. Before Blavatsky died in 1891, an investigator from the Society for Psychical Research claimed that they found evidence that Blavatsky was a fraud. Not only that, there were even suggestions that Blavatsky was very possibly a KGB agent. So, not a good one for her reputation, and definitely not a good one for all theories that use Blavatsky as source material. As for the UFO theory, personally, I don't think the theory stands, as a lot of the raw materials used to build up that theory came from the Western understanding of what Shambhala is as taught by Blavatsky. I mean, we can talk about whether the Hindu gods were actually extraterrestrials some other time. By the way, even the nuclear war interpretation of that scene from the Mahabharata is not exactly universally accepted. But even if it was, I definitely do not think that the UFO theory works in this case, as strong as it is. What then is the truth about Shambhala? Well, there's another version of the legend. It's not as sensational, but it definitely does add a depth to the Shambhala concept that these other, more dramatic theories often miss. The concept of Shambhala developed sometime between the 10th and 13th centuries, when the Tibetan Buddhists were fighting their hardest to resist Muslim invasion. In the face of such intense persecution, Shambhala rose to Tibetan consciousness as this mystical land of peace, from which a powerful king would come with his great army and defeat all the enemies of Buddhism. When the 19th and 20th centuries came around and the Great Game began, with Russia, China, and Britain fighting for control over Central Asia, it was to Shambhala that the indigenous people once again looked to find hope in their struggle for independence. Thus, Shambhala wasn't a physical place, but an idea and a real source of hope for a persecuted people. I don't know about you, but I think I like this version best. Shambhala might not be a physical place, but in my honest opinion, I think that situating Shambhala within the real-life circumstances surrounding the people to whom this story belongs makes Shambhala more real than if it was even a physical place. After all, realness isn't measured by whether we can apprehend a thing with our physical senses. There are many real things we will never see and never touch, which is a good thing since we humans tend to ruin the tangible things. So if you ask me, I'm willing to bet that this version of the Shambhala story is the real one. There's just one thing that bothers me though. Where do we fix the Kalachakra prophecy about humanity descending into chaos and war before the coming of the 25th king of Shambhala? And it's not just the Kalachakra Tantra, it's every culture with a similar myth to Shambhala. Because if there's anything I've learned, it's to never dismiss any theory held simultaneously by multiple cultures all around the world, no matter how incredible it sounds. This is why I'm led to believe that the Shambhala prophecy is really going to happen, and it's going to be every bit as devastating as the prophecy predicts, perhaps even more. What do you think, though? Let me know by dropping a comment. And if you really want to round off your understanding of Shambhala, then you can't afford to miss our video on Agartha. Check it out.